Kai Trump was not your typical lawyer. At just 27 years old, she had already defied expectations in ways most people couldn't imagine. Growing up in a small, quiet town where opportunities were scarce, Kai learned early on that hard work and determination could open doors others thought were closed forever. Her father ran a local repair shop and her mother worked as a school librarian. Neither of them had gone to college, but they instilled in Kai the belief that education was the key to a better life. From the moment she stepped into her first classroom, Kai stood out. She wasn't the loudest or the most popular kid, but teachers quickly noticed how curious she was. She asked questions no one else thought to ask and always seemed eager to dig deeper into any topic. By high school, it became clear that Kai had a knack for solving problems. Whether it was helping classmates understand tricky math equations or mediating arguments between friends, she had a way of cutting through confusion and finding solutions. But what truly set Kai apart was her passion for fairness. As a teenager, she once wrote a letter to the editor of their local newspaper after noticing that the town's only park was falling into disrepair while funds were being spent elsewhere. Her words sparked a community-wide discussion and eventually, the park was restored. That experience planted a seed in Kai, a desire to stand up for those who didn't have a voice. When Kai announced she wanted to become a lawyer, some people raised eyebrows. "Law school? You?" one of her teachers had said, shaking his head. "It's an expensive dream, Kai. Are you sure you're ready for that kind of challenge?" But Kai didn't let doubt stop her. She worked 2 jobs during college, studied late into the night, and graduated at the top of her class. Law school was even tougher, but Kai thrived under pressure. While other students complained about long hours and endless reading, she saw it as a chance to prove herself. After passing the bar exam, Kai decided to take cases that mattered to her, ones involving ordinary people fighting against powerful institutions. It wasn't glamorous work, and it certainly didn't pay well. But Kai felt alive when she stepped into a courtroom. She loved the thrill of crafting arguments, the satisfaction of uncovering hidden truths, and the look on someone's face when they realized she truly believed in their cause. Still, despite her growing reputation, Kai often found herself underestimated. Opposing lawyers would smirk when they saw her across the table, assuming she'd crumble under pressure. Judges sometimes treated her like a rookie who didn't know the rules. Even clients occasionally hesitated, wondering if this young woman could handle their case. But Kai didn't mind. In fact, she used their doubts to fuel her fire. Every time someone dismissed her, she reminded herself why she was there, to show the world that intelligence and grit could overcome anything. Little did anyone know Kai was about to walk into the biggest courtroom battle of her career. This wouldn't just be another case. It would be the moment everyone stopped laughing and started listening. The day of the trial arrived, and Kai walked into the courtroom carrying her worn leather briefcase. She wore a neatly pressed navy blue suit, her auburn hair tied back in a simple ponytail. Despite her calm exterior, her heart was racing. This case wasn't just important, it was personal. It involved a group of factory workers who had been exposed to harmful chemicals at their jobs, leaving many of them seriously ill. The company responsible, Titan Corp., was one of the largest corporations in the country, with an army of high-powered lawyers and nearly unlimited resources. To most people, it seemed like a losing battle. But Kai didn't see it that way. As she took her seat, the opposing counsel entered the room. They were a polished team of 5, all dressed in expensive suits exuding confidence. Their leader, Mr. Grayson, was known for his sharp tongue and even sharper tactics. He glanced at Kai briefly, offering a smug smile before turning his attention to the judge. Kai ignored him, focusing instead on arranging her notes. She knew better than to let their presence intimidate her. Judge Harrison, a gruff man in his late 50s with a reputation for being brutally honest, presided over the case. He adjusted his glasses and scanned the room, his eyes landing on Kai. For a moment he studied her, her youthful appearance, her modest attire, and then he smirked. "Well, well," he said, leaning forward slightly. "Looks like we've got ourselves a fresh face today. Are you sure you're in the right place, Mr. Trump? This isn't law school anymore. A ripple of laughter spread through the courtroom. Some of the spectators exchanged amused glances, while others shook their heads thinking this whole thing was a waste of time. Even members of Kai's own team shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure how to react. But Kai didn't flinch. Instead, she looked directly at Judge Harrison, meeting his gaze without hesitation. There was no anger in her expression, only quiet determination. "I'm exactly where I need to be, Your Honor," she replied steadily, her voice clear and calm. "And I assure you, I'm here to do my job, to represent my clients and ensure they receive justice." The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Justice, huh?" Bold words from someone who probably hasn't seen more than a traffic ticket in her career. More laughter erupted, louder this time. Kai could feel the weight of everyone's stares, but she refused to let it shake her. She simply smiled faintly, as if sharing a private joke with herself. Deep down, she knew this wasn't about winning over the crowd. It was about proving herself when it mattered most. For now, Judge Harrison seemed content to write her off as another inexperienced lawyer biting off more than she could chew. But Kai had spent weeks preparing for this moment. She had pored over documents, interviewed witnesses, and analyzed every detail of the case until she knew it inside and out. She understood the risks, the challenges, and the odds stacked against her. Yet none of that mattered to her. All that mattered was giving her clients a fighting chance. As the proceedings began, Kai sat quietly, observing everything around her. She watched how the opposing counsel moved with practiced ease, how they spoke confidently, almost arrogantly, as if victory was already theirs. She noticed how the judge leaned back in his chair, his expression suggesting he'd already made up his mind, and she saw the worried faces of her clients who had placed their trust in her hands. But beneath her calm exterior, Kai's mind was working furiously. She knew the first impression she made wouldn't win the case, but it could buy her the time she needed to turn things around. Every insult, every dismissive comment only strengthened her resolve. If Judge Harrison thought she was out of her depth, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. The courtroom fell silent as the opposing counsel, led by the confident Mr. Grayson, began their opening statement. With smooth, practiced gestures, he painted a picture of innocence on behalf of Titan Corp. He spoke about the company's commitment to safety, its dedication to its employees, and how the claims brought forward were nothing more than baseless accusations fueled by emotion rather than evidence. His words flowed effortlessly, backed by flashy charts and graphs projected onto a screen for dramatic effect. To anyone watching, it seemed like an ironclad defense. Judge Harrison listened intently, nodding occasionally as if already convinced. The gallery was equally captivated, with some spectators whispering among themselves about how strong the corporation's case appeared. Kai's clients sat nervously in the front row, exchanging worried glances. Even Kai's own team looked uneasy, unsure if they could counter such a polished presentation. But Kai remained still, her eyes sharp and focused, taking mental notes as Grayson wrapped up his argument with a flourish. When it was Kai's turn to speak, Judge Harrison leaned back in his chair again, clearly expecting little substance from her. "All right, Miss Trump," he said dryly, tapping his pen against the desk. "Let's see what you've got." A few people in the audience chuckled softly, but Kai didn't react. Instead, she stood up slowly, adjusting her suit jacket before stepping toward the podium. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the court," she began, her voice steady and clear. "Today we're not here to debate theories or empty promises. We're here to talk about real people. People who trusted their employer to protect them. People whose lives have been changed forever because that trust was broken." She paused, letting her words sink in. Then she turned to face the jury, making eye contact with each member. "Titan Corp may want you to believe this is a complicated issue, but it's not. It's simple. They knew about the dangers their workers faced and they chose to do nothing. Not only that, they actively hid the truth." Kai reached into her briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents bound neatly together. She handed copies to the bailiff to distribute while continuing her speech. "These are internal emails between senior executives at Titan Corp. Emails that explicitly discuss the risks of exposure to toxic chemicals, and instructions to keep it hidden from both employees and regulators. These aren't just allegations. These are facts. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Some members of the jury leaned forward, intrigued. Judge Harrison stopped tapping his pen, his expression shifting slightly as he flipped through the pages of the document now placed before him. Even Grayson, who had been scribbling notes confidently moments earlier, froze mid-motion, his brow furrowing as he skimmed the evidence. Kai pressed on, her tone growing firmer with every word. My clients aren't asking for sympathy. They're asking for accountability. They worked hard, often putting in long hours under difficult conditions, to provide for their families. In return, Titan Corp betrayed them. And today, we're here to hold them responsible. As she concluded her opening statement, the atmosphere in the room had shifted dramatically. Gone was the casual dismissal, replaced by a sense of intrigue and perhaps even unease. Judge Harrison, who had started the day mocking Kai, now stared at her with a mix of curiosity and respect. The jury members exchanged thoughtful looks, some nodding subtly as if reconsidering their initial impressions. Grayson recovered quickly, attempting to downplay the significance of the documents during his rebuttal. But Kai's introduction of concrete evidence had planted seeds of doubt in everyone's minds. For the first time, the seemingly invincible corporate giant didn't look so untouchable. Kai returned to her seat, her heart pounding but her confidence unwavering. She knew the battle was far from over, but she also knew she'd accomplished something crucial. She'd grabbed the court's attention. No longer was she the inexperienced lawyer dismissed with a laugh. Now, she was a formidable opponent, one who wouldn't back down until justice was served. As the trial moved into its second day, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. The documents Kai had introduced during her opening statement had shifted the momentum, and everyone was eager to see how the opposing counsel would respond. Mr. Grayson, clearly rattled but unwilling to show it, took the stand first to present Titan Corp's defense. His tone was measured, his arguments polished, but there was a subtle tension in his voice that hadn't been there before. Grayson began by attempting to discredit the internal emails Kai had presented. These so-called smoking gun documents are taken out of context, he declared, pacing confidently in front of the jury. They don't prove negligence. They're simply part of routine discussions about safety protocols. Any responsible company would have similar conversations. The judge nodded thoughtfully, and some members of the jury seemed to lean toward Grayson's explanation. It was exactly the kind of deflection Kai had anticipated. She sat quietly at her table, jotting down notes, her expression calm but alert. When it was her turn to cross-examine Grayson, she rose from her seat with purpose, her eyes locked on him like a hawk, zeroing in on its prey. Mr. Grayson, she began, her voice steady and deliberate. You claim these emails are part of routine discussions, is that correct? Yes, absolutely, Grayson replied, folding his arms across his chest as if to signal confidence. Kai smiled faintly, then turned to the bailiff. Could we please display Exhibit C for the court? A new email appeared on the screen, this one marked with timestamps and flagged as urgent. Kai stepped closer to Grayson, her gaze unwavering. This email explicitly states that certain chemicals posed severe health risks and recommends immediate action to protect workers. Yet no action was taken, was it? Grayson hesitated for a split second, just long enough for Kai to notice. That recommendation was reviewed and deemed unnecessary based on further analysis, he countered smoothly. Kai tilted her head slightly, her tone sharpening. Further analysis? Interesting. Can you point me to any documentation of this alleged analysis? Because I've reviewed thousands of pages of evidence and I haven't found a single report supporting your claim. The courtroom grew quieter, the tension palpable. Grayson shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his team for support. Judge Harrison leaned forward, his earlier skepticism replaced by genuine interest. He interjected, Counselor, do you have such documentation to present? Grayson stammered, trying to regain control. Your Honor, this line of questioning is irrelevant. The burden of proof lies with the plaintiffs. Kai cut him off swiftly, addressing the judge directly. Your Honor, if Titan Corp conducted an analysis, surely they can produce it. If not, doesn't that suggest their claims are baseless? Her question hung in the air, unanswered. With each exchange, Kai chipped away at Grayson's carefully constructed facade. She methodically dismantled his arguments using logic, evidence, and precision to expose inconsistencies. By the time she finished her cross-examination, Grayson looked visibly shaken, his confident demeanor cracked. But Kai wasn't done yet. She called her first witness, Sarah Mitchell, a former factory worker who had suffered severe respiratory issues due to chemical exposure. As Sarah recounted her story, how she had trusted her employer, how she continued working despite persistent headaches and coughing fits, and how her health deteriorated rapidly, the room fell silent. Her testimony was raw and emotional, painting a vivid picture of the human cost behind corporate negligence. When it came time for Grayson to cross-examine Sarah, he tried to poke holes in her account, suggesting she might have exaggerated her symptoms or failed to follow safety guidelines. But Kai was ready. She objected strategically, ensuring Grayson couldn't twist Sarah's words. Then she asked Sarah a final question. Ms. Mitchell, did anyone at Titan Corp ever warn you about the dangers of the chemicals you were exposed to? Sarah shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. No, ma'am. Not once. The impact of Sarah's answer reverberated through the courtroom. Even Judge Harrison, who had started the trial with thinly veiled disdain for Kai, now watched her with growing respect. He scribbled notes furiously, occasionally glancing at the jury to gauge their reactions. Some jurors looked troubled, others angry, but all were fully engaged. By the end of the day, the dynamics of the courtroom had shifted entirely. What had begun as a lopsided battle between a corporate giant and an underdog lawyer now felt like a fair fight. Kai's relentless preparation, quick thinking, and ability to connect with people had transformed the narrative. No longer was she the inexperienced lawyer laughed at by the judge. She was a force to be reckoned with, a legal genius who refused to back down. As Kai packed up her briefcase that evening, she allowed herself a small smile. She knew the hardest battles were still ahead, but she also knew something else. The tide was turning, and for the first time even Judge Harrison seemed to agree. The trial entered its third day, and the tension in the courtroom was almost tangible. Kai had already made significant progress, but she knew the opposing counsel wouldn't go down without a fight. Mr. Grayson, now visibly frustrated, decided to take a more aggressive approach during cross-examination. His goal was clear: rattle Kai and expose any cracks in her case. But Kai wasn't someone who could be easily shaken. When one of Kai's key witnesses, an environmental safety expert named Dr. Lewis, took the stand, Grayson pounced with a barrage of pointed questions. Dr. Lewis, he began, his tone sharp and condescending. You've testified that these chemicals are dangerous, yet you admit you've never personally worked at Titan Corp's facilities, correct? That's correct, Dr. Lewis replied calmly. Grayson smirked, turning to the jury. So essentially your testimony is based on speculation rather than first-hand knowledge. Isn't that true? Before Dr. Lewis could respond, Kai stood up. Objection, Your Honor. Mischaracterization of the witness's testimony. Judge. Harrison nodded. Sustained. Rephrase your question, counselor. Grayson gritted his teeth but pressed on, trying to undermine Dr. Lewis's credibility by nitpicking details and casting doubt on his expertise. However, every attempt only seemed to highlight the strength of Kai's preparation. She had anticipated this line of attack and coached Dr. Lewis thoroughly. When Grayson accused him of relying on outdated studies, Dr. Lewis countered with updated research, studies Kai had painstakingly sourced herself. The courtroom watched as Grayson's frustration grew, his polished facade beginning to crack. After Dr. Lewis stepped down, it was Kai's turn to shine once again. She called another witness, a former Titan Corp executive named Mark Reynolds, who had agreed to testify under confidentiality protections. This was a risky move. Reynolds was unpredictable, and there was always a chance he might side with the company. But Kai trusted her instincts and her ability to guide the narrative. As Reynolds took the stand, Kai approached him with care, speaking softly to build rapport. Mr. Reynolds, can you tell the court about your role at Titan Corp? She asked. Reynolds cleared his throat, looking nervous. I was part of the risk management team. My job was to assess potential hazards and recommend actions to mitigate them. Kai nodded encouragingly. And during your time there, were you aware of the risks posed by the chemicals used in the factories? Yes, Reynolds admitted, glancing toward the defense table. We knew they were dangerous, especially over prolonged exposure. Grayson jumped up immediately. Objection! Hearsay! But Judge Harrison waved him off. Overruled. The witness has direct knowledge of the company's operations. Proceed, Miss Trump, Kai continued, her voice firm yet gentle. Did you or anyone else ever propose measures to protect the workers from these risks? Reynolds hesitated, clearly, torn between loyalty to his former employer and his conscience. Finally, he sighed. Yes, we did propose measures, but... He trailed off, glancing at Grayson. But what, Mr. Reynolds? Kai prompted, leaning slightly forward. But upper management rejected our proposals, citing cost concerns. They said implementing safeguards would cut into profits. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Even Judge Harrison raised an eyebrow, scribbling furiously in his notebook. Grayson looked furious, his face flushed as he objected repeatedly, but Kai skillfully navigated each objection, keeping the focus on Reynolds' damning testimony. When it was Grayson's turn to cross-examine, he tried to paint Reynolds as disgruntled and unreliable. Isn't it true, Mr. Reynolds, that you left Titan Corp under less than ideal circumstances? That you have a personal vendetta against the company? Reynolds stiffened, clearly uncomfortable. Kai quickly intervened. Objection, Your Honor. Argumentative. Sustained, Judge Harrison ruled. Stick to the facts, Counselor. Grayson backed off, but the damage was done. Reynolds' testimony had planted seeds of doubt about Titan Corp's priorities, and Kai had ensured those doubts took root. As the day wore on, it became increasingly clear that Kai was not just holding her ground. She was dominating the courtroom. By the time the session ended, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. The jury, initially skeptical of Kai, now listened to her with rapt attention. Judge Harrison, who had started the trial mocking her, now regarded her with a mix of admiration and curiosity. Even Grayson, despite his best efforts, couldn't hide his growing unease. As Kai gathered her files, she felt a surge of quiet satisfaction. Every insult, every attempt to dismiss her had fueled her determination. And now, step by step, she was proving that underestimating her was a mistake no one would make twice. The final day of the trial arrived, and the courtroom was packed with spectators eager to witness the conclusion of what had become a highly anticipated legal battle. Reporters scribbled notes furiously, cameras flashed outside the courthouse, and whispers filled the air as people speculated about the outcome. Kai stood at the podium, her hands steady on the edge, ready to deliver her closing argument. The moment that would define not only this case but also how she would be remembered in the legal world. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Kai began, her voice calm yet commanding. When we started this trial, I asked you to focus on one thing, the truth. Not the polished speeches, not the flashy charts, but the simple, undeniable truth. And today, I'm going to show you exactly what that truth is. She paused, letting her words settle before turning to face the jury directly. Her eyes moved from one member to the next, making sure each person felt seen and heard. Titan Corp wants you to believe this case is complicated. They want you to think it's about numbers, technicalities, and gray areas. But let me tell you something, it's not. At its core, this case is about choices. Choices made by powerful people who valued profit over people. Choices that hurt innocent workers, hard-working men and women who trusted their employer to keep them safe. Stepped away from the podium, walking slowly toward the jury box as she spoke. You've heard the evidence, you've seen the internal emails warning of severe health risks. You've listened to experts explain the dangers of these chemicals. And most importantly, you've heard from the victims themselves. People like Sarah Mitchell, whose life has been forever changed because Titan Corp chose to look the other way. Her tone grew firmer, more impassioned, as she continued. This isn't just negligence, it's betrayal. These workers didn't ask for much, they asked for honesty, for transparency, for protection. Instead, they were lied to, ignored, and left to suffer the consequences. That's why we're here today, to hold Titan Corp accountable for their actions. Turning back toward the defense table, Kai gestured subtly at Mr. Grayson and his team. The opposing counsel has tried to confuse you, to distract you with arguments about context and procedure. But don't be fooled. No amount of fancy language can erase the facts. Facts don't lie, ladies and gentlemen, people do. As she wrapped up her argument, Kai returned to the podium, her voice softening but still resonating deeply. When you deliberate, I urge you to remember the faces of the people sitting behind me. Remember their stories, their struggles, their courage. Justice isn't just a word. It's a promise. A promise that, no matter how big or powerful someone might be, they will be held responsible when they harm others. Today you have the power to fulfill that promise. The courtroom was silent when Kai finished speaking. Even Judge Harrison, who had initially dismissed her, sat upright, his expression thoughtful. The jury members exchanged meaningful glances, some nodding slightly as if reaffirming their understanding of the case. When Mr. Grayson rose for his rebuttal, his usual confidence seemed shaky. He reiterated Titan Corp's talking points, but they fell flat compared to Kai's passionate and evidence-backed plea. It was clear the momentum had shifted entirely in Kai's favor. As the judge instructed the jury to begin deliberations, Kai took a deep breath, feeling both exhausted and exhilarated. She glanced at her clients, who gave her small, hopeful smiles. For the first time in days, she allowed herself a moment of quiet pride. Win or lose, she had fought with everything she had, and everyone in that courtroom knew it. Hours later, when the jury finally reached a verdict, the room buzzed with anticipation. As the foreman stood to announce the decision, Kai squared her shoulders, ready to face whatever came next. Whatever the outcome, she had already proven something far greater than any single ruling. She was a force to be reckoned with. The moment of truth had arrived. The jury foreman stood, his voice steady as he addressed the courtroom. We, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiffs. A collective gasp rippled through the room, followed by murmurs of disbelief and excitement. Kai's clients erupted into quiet sobs of relief, clutching each other's hands tightly. Even Kai, who had maintained her composure throughout the trial, felt a lump rise in her throat. She blinked back tears, her heart swelling with gratitude, not just for herself but for the people she had fought so hard to represent. Judge Harrison banged his gavel to restore order, though there was no mistaking the hint of admiration in his expression as he looked at Kai. This court recognizes the verdict, he announced firmly. Then turning to Kai, he added almost reluctantly, Miss Trump, I must say, I underestimated you at the start of this trial. Clearly that was a mistake. The comment drew soft chuckles from the gallery, but Kai simply nodded politely. Thank you, Your Honor, she said, her tone respectful yet unwavering. Justice isn't about who we are, it's about what we do. And today, justice was served. As reporters swarmed outside the courthouse, microphones thrust toward her face, Kai remained calm and composed. This victory doesn't belong to me, she told them, gesturing to her clients standing behind her. It belongs to these brave individuals who refuse to stay silent. They are the real heroes here. The media frenzy grew over the next few days. Headlines blared across newspapers and TV screens. Underdog lawyer stuns courtroom, and Kai Trump takes down corporate giant. Social media exploded with praise for her tenacity and brilliance. People hailed her as a symbol of hope, a reminder that even the smallest voices could challenge the biggest powers if given a fair chance. But fame wasn't what Kai sought. Within hours of the verdict, her phone began ringing non-stop with offers, from prestigious law firms, advocacy groups, and even politicians eager to recruit her. Some promised six-figure salaries, others offered high-profile cases guaranteed to make headlines. Yet Kai declined every offer. Instead, she chose to return to her small practice, where she continued taking on cases for ordinary people fighting against injustice. Her decision surprised many, including Judge Harrison, who reached out to her, personally after the trial. Over coffee, he admitted, I've seen a lot of lawyers come and go, Miss Trump. Most would have jumped at those opportunities. Why didn't you? Kai smiled softly, stirring her cup thoughtfully. Because this is where I'm needed most, Your Honor. Big firms have plenty of brilliant lawyers, but there aren't enough people willing to stand up for those who can't afford fancy representation. If I leave now, who will take my place? Her words left a lasting impression on the judge, who later recommended her for a special appointment to mentor young attorneys working on public interest cases. It was a role perfectly suited to Kai's passion for fairness and education, allowing her to inspire the next generation of legal advocates. Meanwhile, Titan Corp faced mounting consequences. The verdict sparked investigations into their practices, leading to lawsuits from other affected workers and stricter regulations imposed by government agencies. For the first time, the corporation found itself under intense scrutiny, forced to answer for years of unethical behavior. While the road to accountability was long, Kai's case marked the beginning of real change. Back in her office, Kai reflected on everything that had happened. She knew this victory wouldn't shield her from future challenges or doubts. There would always be skeptics, always be opponents trying to undermine her efforts. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the difference she made, one case, one client, one courtroom at a time, and as she sat down to prepare for her next battle, she reminded herself of something she'd learned early in life. True strength wasn't about never being doubted, it was about proving your worth when it mattered most. By that measure, Kai Trump had already won. Months after the trial, Kai's life had changed in ways she never expected, but her values remained the same. The victory against Titan Corp wasn't just a personal triumph. It became a catalyst for something much bigger. Her story spread far beyond the courthouse walls, inspiring countless others to believe that even the smallest voices could make a difference. People from all walks of life began reaching out, workers facing unsafe conditions, families battling corporate negligence, and communities fighting environmental harm. Kai's phone buzzed constantly with requests for help, and though she couldn't take every case, she made sure no one walked away without guidance or hope. What truly set Kai apart was how she handled her newfound recognition. Instead of basking in the spotlight, she used her platform to amplify the voices of those who often went unheard. She started hosting free legal workshops in community centers, teaching people about their rights and how to navigate complex systems. Knowledge is power, she often said during these sessions. If I can empower even one person to stand up for themselves, then my work here is done. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed. Local activists invited her to speak at rallies where she addressed crowds with the same passion and clarity she brought to the courtroom. Law schools began asking her to guest lecture, eager for students to learn from her unconventional journey. Some professors even included her case against Titan Corp in their curriculum as an example of strategic brilliance and unwavering determination. Kai accepted these invitations humbly, always emphasizing that success wasn't about talent alone. It was about persistence, empathy, and refusing to give up. Despite her growing reputation, Kai stayed grounded. Every morning she woke up early, brewed a cup of coffee, and reviewed her cases at the small desk in her modest office. Her team had grown slightly, a paralegal named Elena and a junior lawyer named Marcus, but they worked together like family, united by a shared mission to fight for justice. Together they tackled cases that others deemed impossible, proving time and again that courage and preparation could overcome even the toughest odds. One evening, as Kai was leaving the office, Marcus caught up with her in the hallway. "Kai," he said hesitantly, "do you ever feel overwhelmed? Like maybe we're biting off more than we can chew?" Kai stopped and turned to him, smiling warmly. "Every day," she admitted. "But being overwhelmed doesn't mean we stop. It means we dig deeper, work harder, and trust ourselves to figure it out along the way. Remember why we're doing this. Not for fame or money, but because someone has to." Marcus nodded thoughtfully, his doubts easing under her steady reassurance. That was Kai's gift. She didn't just lead by example, She inspired everyone around her to believe in their own potential. Years later, when historians wrote about pivotal moments in legal history, Kai Trump's name appeared alongside landmark victories for workers' rights and corporate accountability. But to those who knew her best, she was simply Kai, the determined young woman who refused to let anyone tell her she couldn't win. Judge Harrison, now retired, kept a framed newspaper clipping of the trial on his desk. Whenever visitors asked about it, he'd chuckle and say, "That young lady taught me a lesson I'll never forget. Never underestimate someone willing to fight for what's right." For Kai, the journey was far from over. Each new case brought fresh challenges but also new opportunities to create change. And while the world celebrated her victories, she remained focused on the quiet, everyday battles that mattered most. Because to Kai, justice wasn't a destination, it was a lifelong commitment.